Do you ever notice something in a scene that feels small at first? Just a gesture, a pause, a look, and then it follows you for days. Back in Season 2, Episode 3, Save the last one, there's that moment when Shane shaves his head in the mirror. The camera cuts between his electric razor and the flashback of Otis dying, but it's what happens after that stays with me. Shane touches the back of his head, where Otis tore out chunks of his hair during the struggle. No tears, no breakdown. Just this quiet transformation, like he's mourning someone, maybe the version of himself he used to be. Everyone remembers Shane as the villain, the man who went too far. But what if the apocalypse didn't break Shane? What if it just showed him what was always true, that survival doesn't wait for the good guy to catch up? Let's trace that thread together, gently, and see where it leads. Back in the early days at the quarry camp outside Atlanta, before Rick arrived and everything shifted, Shane was the one keeping people alive. Season 1, episodes 2 through 4, show us those fragile weeks when the group was still figuring out what the world had become. Shane organized the water runs, posted sentries, mediated disputes between Dale and Ed Pelletier over firewood. He wasn't elected. He didn't ask for authority. He just carried it because someone had to, and no one else was stepping up. There's a scene in episode 3, Tell It to the Frogs, where Shane's teaching Carl how to catch frogs by the quarry's edge. It's such a small moment. Patience, gentleness, the kind of thing a father would do. And Lori watches from a distance with this complicated expression, gratitude mixed with something heavier. Shane had become the protector, the provider, the steady hand when everything else was chaos. He kept schedules. He made people feel safe enough to sleep at night. But here's what I think about when I watch those early episodes. Shane wasn't waiting for rescue helicopters like the others. He wasn't talking about the CDC finding a cure or the military regrouping in some safe zone. He was already calculating, how much fuel do we have? How many people can we feed? Who's a liability in a fight? These weren't the questions of someone hoping things would go back to normal. These were the questions of someone who already understood that normal was gone forever. The weight of those decisions, the daily burden of choosing who gets the last can of formula or which family gets the tent closest to the fire, no one thanked him for that. They just expected it. And when walkers got too close, Shane was the one who went out with his shotgun to clear them. He built a system, quiet and unglamorous, that kept them alive until Rick's arrival changed everything. He wasn't waiting for rescue. He was building something that could last, the hospital. Season 1, Episode 6, TS-19, gives us the flashback that defines everything Shane became. Rick's lying unconscious in that hospital bed, machines beeping, and the world outside is collapsing. Shane's there, loyal, desperate, trying to move his best friend as the military evacuation turns into chaos. Then he hears it gunfire echoing through the halls, not firefights with the infected. Executions. Soldiers putting down patients who couldn't be moved. The power cuts, the monitors flatline. And in that moment of total silence, Shane does something that haunts him for the rest of his life. He puts his ear to Rick's chest, listening for a heartbeat in the chaos, and hears nothing. The building is being overrun. The dead are coming. And Shane makes a choice. He barricades Rick's door with a gurney, the only protection he can offer, and he runs. Was it abandonment? That's what Shane tortures himself with later. That's the guilt we see eating at him when Rick returns alive, when Shane has to face the reality that he left his best friend behind. But here's the question that keeps me up at night. In that moment, with soldiers executing patients and walkers flooding the halls, what was the right choice? Shane tried to move Rick. He checked for signs of life in the only way he knew how, and when he heard nothing, when staying meant dying with his friend's corpse, he chose survival. The hospital door becomes a symbol that echoes through the entire series. It's the first threshold Shane crosses, the moment when loyalty and survival split into two different paths. He barricaded it not as a final abandonment, but as the last act of protection he could manage before the world forced him to choose himself. And I think that's the seed of everything that follows. Shane learned that day that love isn't always enough to save someone. That sometimes the best you can do is close the door and keep moving. Some fans see this moment as Shane's original sin, the betrayal that proves he was always selfish. Others see it as impossible circumstances, forcing an impossible choice. Both interpretations make sense, and that's what makes it so powerful. Because when Rick wakes up alone in that hospital weeks later, in episode 1, wandering through the corpse-filled hallways, Shane fled. He's walking through the consequences of a choice he'll never fully understand until he has to make similar ones himself. The gurney, the door, the silence. 3 anchors that define Shane's transformation. A gesture of protection, a barrier that can't be uncrossed, and the absence of certainty that forces action. Was it giving up, or the first hard choice no one else had to make? Everything fractures the moment Rick walks back into that camp. Season 1, Episode 3, Tell It to the Frogs, shows us the reunion joyful, tearful, everyone celebrating the miracle of Rick Grimes alive against impossible odds. But if you watch Shane's face during that scene, really watch it, there's this flicker of something that isn't quite happiness. Relief, yes. Love for his friend, absolutely. But underneath that, there's disbelief. Shane built something at that camp. He established routines, made hard calls, kept people alive through weeks of uncertainty and fear. Then Rick arrives, and within hours, the group's dynamic shifts. People look to Rick for answers. They defer to his judgment. Not because Rick demanded it or even wanted it initially, but because something about Rick Grimes makes people believe things might still work out okay. It's the same quality that made Rick a good sheriff's deputy back in King County, that calm authority, that moral clarity, that sense that he'll find the right path if everyone just trusts him. And in the old world, that was leadership. But Shane has been living in the new world, the one where moral clarity can get you killed, and the right path might be the one that demands sacrifice no one wants to acknowledge. There's this tension building across episodes 3 and 4, subtle but undeniable. Shane suggests they leave the quarry, find somewhere more defensible. Rick wants to stay, give people stability. Shane argues for tighter security, armed sentries at night. Rick worries about scaring people, making the camp feel like a prison. And every time Rick's instinct leans toward preserving humanity and hope, Shane's instinct leans toward accepting what they've become. The psychological weight of this shift is crushing. Shane didn't just lose his leadership role, he lost the validation that his brutal pragmatism was necessary. If Rick can lead with optimism and moral authority and still keep people safe, then maybe Shane's worldview is wrong. Maybe the sacrifices Shane was preparing to make, the hardness he was cultivating, maybe none of it was actually required. But here's where it gets complicated. Shane's face in those early episodes shows a man grappling with 2 incompatible truths. He's relieved his best friend is alive. He's grateful to share the burden of leadership, but he's also terrified that Rick's going to get everyone killed by refusing to accept how dark this new world really is. 2 visions of survival idealism versus pragmatism, hope versus necessity, and the question that sits at the center of their fracturing brotherhood: whose rules would you follow if the world ended tomorrow? The man who believes people are still worth saving as people, or the man who knows that sometimes saving people means sacrificing what makes them human? The answer matters because it defines not just survival, but what you're surviving for. Season 2, Episode 7, Pretty Much Dead Already, The Barn. If there's one moment that crystallizes everything Shane understands about the apocalypse that others refuse to accept, it's when he breaks those locks and throws open Herschel's barn doors. The setup is devastating in its simplicity. Herschel Green has been keeping walkers in his barn, including his wife and neighbors, because he believes they're sick people who might be cured someday. He calls them people. He forbids the group from killing them. And Rick, trying to maintain the fragile peace that lets them stay on Herschel's farm, goes along with it. He asks everyone to respect Herschel's wishes, to give him time to come around. But Shane sees it differently. He sees a barn full of corpses that could break loose and slaughter everyone. He sees a delusion being treated with more respect than the living people at risk. And when he opens those doors and the walkers spill out onto the farm, when Shane and the others have to put them down one by one in front of Herschel's horrified eyes, it's brutal and cruel and absolutely impossible to argue with the logic. Shane's dialogue in that scene cuts like a knife. These things ain't sick. They're not people. They're dead. Ain't gonna feel nothing for them, 'cause all they do, they kill. He's shouting, gesturing at the walkers stumbling toward them, and everyone's horrified not because he's wrong, but because he's forcing them to see what they've been avoiding. The emotional cost is immediate. Herschel's hope, his refusal to accept his wife, is truly gone, gets destroyed in the space of minutes. Maggie watches her father's world collapse. Rick feels his authority undermined in front of everyone, and Shane becomes the villain of the moment, the man who was too harsh, too brutal, too unwilling to let people grieve in their own way. But here's the pattern that emerges if you trace Shane's actions across the series. He keeps forcing truths that people need to accept in order to survive. The walkers aren't sick. The old rules don't apply. Safety is temporary. Hope without pragmatism gets you killed. And every time Shane tears down a comforting delusion, he's right about the danger, even if he's wrong about how to handle the humanity cost. The barn becomes another door in Shane's story. Herschel locked the dead inside, preserving the illusion that they were still the people he loved. Shane opened it, forcing everyone to confront what they'd become. And just like the hospital door Shane barricaded before fleeing, this is a threshold that can't be uncrossed. Once you see walkers as just dead things that need to be put down, you can't go back to seeing them as potentially curable neighbors. Once you accept that survival demands brutality, you can't reclaim the innocence of hoping for rescue. Some fans argue Shane was cruel to Herschel, that there were gentler ways to make him understand. Others point out that every moment those walkers were in that barn was a moment they could break loose and kill Sophia or Carl or anyone else. Both perspectives hold weight, and that's Shane's tragedy. He's often right about the threat, but his method of addressing it burns every bridge he has left. The doors he opens can't be closed, and everyone who walks through them with him becomes a little more like him, whether they want to admit it or not. Season 2, Episode 3, Save the Last One, The Otis Incident. This is where Shane crosses a line that he can never uncross, and it happens for the most sympathetic reason imaginable: saving Carl's life. The context: Carl's been shot, he's dying, and he needs medical supplies from the overrun high school. Shane and Otis volunteer to make the run together. They get the supplies, but walkers swarm them. They're running on empty, injured, and the dead are closing in. In those final moments, with both of them exhausted and the walkers grabbing at their heels, Shane makes a calculation. If both of them try to escape, neither will make it. If one of them sacrifices themselves, the other can survive and get the medical supplies back to save Carl. So Shane shoots Otis in the leg. Not in the head, that would be mercy. In the leg, so Otis will be alive when the walkers reach him, screaming and struggling and buying Shane those precious extra seconds to escape. Otis tears chunks of hair from Shane's scalp in those last desperate moments, a physical mark of what Shane's done, evidence that needs to be hidden. The head-shaving scene that opens the episode is framed as Shane's breakdown, the moment the weight of what he's done crashes down on him. But if you watch closely, it's not a breakdown, it's a ritual. Shane sits in front of that mirror with the electric razor, and as the hair falls away, he's not crying or screaming. He's transforming. The old Shane, the one who might have hesitated or found another way or died trying to save them both, that Shane gets erased along with the evidence Otis left on his scalp. Some viewers see this as the moment Shane becomes irredeemable. He murdered an innocent man, after all. Otis was a good person who volunteered for the supply run knowing the danger. He had a wife who loved him. He was trying to atone for accidentally shooting Carl, and Shane executed him to save his own life. But here's where it gets complicated. Shane's choice saved Carl. The medical supplies made it back. Carl survived. If Shane had tried to save Otis, or if he'd given up and died heroically alongside him, Carl would have bled out on Herschel's dining room table. So the question becomes, does the outcome justify the method? Is one innocent life worth one child's survival? This is the logic that echoes through The Walking Dead for years afterward. Carol stabbed Karen and David first and ended up killing them, then burned their bodies to prevent reanimation and contain the flu. They were already dead when burned, not burned alive. Rick bites out Joe's throat to protect Carl at the claimed cabin, same calculus. Daryl executes Morales because there's no time for sentiment, same calculus. The series keeps circling back to this impossible equation. How much of your humanity can you sacrifice to protect the people you love? Shane did it first. He made the call that everyone else would eventually have to make, and he did it alone, in those terrible seconds with the walkers closing in. He didn't enjoy it. The weight is visible in his eyes when he returns to the farm, when he lies to Patricia about Otis's heroic last stand. But he did it anyway, because in Shane's worldview, Carl's life outweighed Otis's life. The calculation was brutal and simple and undeniable. The shaving scene becomes his confession and his transformation. The gesture of cutting away the hair, the silence of the bathroom while the party celebrates Carl's survival in the next room, the symbolic death of the man who would have died with Otis rather than kill him. 3 anchors marking the point of no return. And here's what haunts me about it. Shane was right that someone had to die in that hallway. He was right that the supplies needed to get back. He was right that Carl's survival depended on brutal, impossible choices. He just didn't ask if being right was worth what it would cost him to live with it. Season 2, Episode 10, 18 Miles Out. This is where Shane and Rick finally stop pretending they can coexist, where all the simmering tension explodes into a physical confrontation that exposes the fundamental difference in how they see the world. The setup is deceptively simple. Rick and Shane are 18 miles from the farm, dropping off Randall, the young man whose group attacked Herschel's land. Rick wants to give Randall supplies and a fighting chance. Shane thinks that's suicidal naivety. They argue. It escalates. And suddenly they're fighting in the middle of an abandoned lot, throwing punches, crashing through windows, surrounded by walkers drawn by the noise. But the real fight isn't physical. It's ideological. Shane's dialogue in this episode strips away any pretense. Rick, you can't just be the good guy and expect to live, okay? Not anymore. And here's the moment that rewrites everything we think we know about Rick Grimes. Rick responds, I'm not the good guy anymore. Rick knows. Even back in Season 2, before the prison, before Terminus, before Alexandria, and Negan, and all the blood to come, Rick already understands what Shane's been trying to tell him. He's not naive about the darkness required to survive. He's just trying to hold on to the idea that they can survive without becoming monsters in the process. Shane sees Rick's morality not as strength, but as denial. Every choice Rick makes to preserve someone's humanity, to give people second chances, to try to build rather than just survive, Shane interprets these as threats to Lori and Carl's safety. And that's where Shane's worldview collapses into something dangerous. He's not wrong about the world being brutal, but he's convinced that Rick's leadership will get the people Shane loves killed. The emotional weight here is crushing because both men are arguing from positions of love. Shane wants to protect Carl and Lori at any cost because he loves them, whether that love is paternal, romantic, or some twisted combination of both. Rick wants to protect everyone because he believes leadership means carrying the burden for people who can't carry it themselves. Neither is purely selfish. Neither is entirely wrong. But Shane's obsession with Lori and Carl has warped his pragmatism into something possessive. He's not just trying to keep them safe, he's trying to claim them. He sees Rick's return from the dead not as a miracle, but as an obstacle to the family Shane built during those first weeks at the quarry. And that's the fatal flaw in Shane's otherwise clear-eyed assessment of the apocalypse. He can see the world objectively, but he can't see his own blind spots. The fight scene at the crossroads becomes a metaphor for their entire relationship. They're throwing each other into walkers, each trying to prove they're the stronger survivor, the better protector. And when it's over, when they're both bloodied and exhausted, and the immediate danger has passed, nothing's resolved. They drive back to the farm in silence, the 18 miles between them and home feeling like a gulf neither can cross. Rick's admission, I'm not the good guy anymore, should have been the moment Shane realized they were on the same page, but Shane's too far gone by this point. He's convinced Rick's version of survival is performative, that Rick's still clinging to sheriff's deputy morality while pretending to accept the apocalypse's rules. Shane can't see that Rick is trying to find a third path, something between Shane's ruthless pragmatism and the naive hope of people like Herschel. The pattern is becoming clear. Shane understands the world better than almost anyone in those early seasons. He sees the threats accurately. He makes brutal but logical choices. But his inability to separate survival strategy from personal obsession, to accept that other people might find different ways to endure, that's what dooms him. Love distorted into protection at any cost becomes indistinguishable from control. Was he trying to save them or claim them? Maybe even Shane didn't know anymore. Season 2, Episode 12, Better Angels, Shane's death. The field at night, the confrontation between brothers that's been building since Rick walked back into that quarry camp. Shane lures Rick out there, planning to kill him, to take his place as Lori and Carl's protector. They fight. Rick talks him down. And then, in a moment of seeming surrender, Rick stabs Shane through the heart. But here's what makes Shane's final episode so prophetic. Nearly everything he said about the new world gets proven true by season 5. His warnings weren't paranoid ravings, they were accurate predictions. We're gonna lose people. That's how it is now. By the time the group reaches Terminus, they've lost Andrea, Lori, T-Dog, Axel, Merle, Beth. Shane was right. You can't think about what's best for you. You gotta think about what's best for the group. This becomes Rick's entire philosophy at the prison and beyond. Shane was right. The people we save, they're gonna slow us down. They're gonna put us at risk. Woodbury, the governor's followers. The moral compromises required to absorb other groups. Shane's warning echoes through every community merger. Shane was right. And the most devastating callback, Season 5, Episode 15, Try. Rick, standing before the Alexandria community after his brutal fight with Pete, says, "You still don't get it. None of you do. We know what needs to be done and we do it. We're the ones who live." That's Shane's philosophy, refined and delivered by the man who killed him for it. Rick became the person Shane tried to make him into. The symbolic callback is even more striking. Rick, at Terminus, covered in blood after biting out Joe's throat, protecting Carl with animalistic violence that's not the sheriff's deputy who rode into Atlanta looking for survivors. That's Shane's reflection, staring back from the dirt. Some fans argue that Rick learned from Shane's mistakes, that he took the survival instinct, but tempered it with community building that Shane never valued. Others say Rick just took longer to break, that Shane was simply ahead of the curve. Both interpretations have merit, and the show deliberately leaves this tension unresolved. What's undeniable is this. By the time Rick is executing Pete in Alexandria Street, declaring that the Alexandria residents don't understand the real world, he's channeling every argument Shane ever made about strength and survival and doing what needs to be done. The world caught up to what Shane already knew. It just took 3 more seasons of loss and blood to get there. The thematic echo is so precise, it almost feels intentional. Shane's final words to Rick in that field are about protecting Carl. Years later, Rick's most brutal choices, killing the claimers, threatening to murder Negan with his bare hands, isolating Alexandria from other communities, all stem from protecting Carl and Judith. The mission is identical. Only the timeline shifted, and here's the question that haunts the entire series. If Shane has survived, would he have become Rick? Or would he have become the governor, building a Woodbury-style empire based on strength and control? Would he have learned to balance pragmatism with hope? Or would his obsessions have consumed him? We can't know. But we can see his DNA in almost every antagonist who follows. The governor's willingness to sacrifice anyone for his vision, Negan's brutal efficiency, Alpha's absolute ruthlessness in service of survival. They're all echoes of Shane's core belief. In the apocalypse, strength determines who lives, and sentiment is a luxury that gets you killed. The difference? Shane loved. The governor, Negan, Alpha, they built philosophies and empires, but Shane's brutality was always personal, always rooted in desperate love for people he thought he was protecting. That's what made him dangerous, but it's also what made him tragic. The world proved Shane right about almost everything. But being right doesn't mean being good. And maybe that's the lesson Rick learned, that Shane never lived long enough to internalize. You can understand the brutal logic of survival without letting it consume everything else. Or maybe Rick just learned to hide it better. Here's the core theory, the pattern that's been building across all these episodes. Shane wasn't wrong about the apocalypse. He was early. And the difference between being early and being right is timing. Think about the character arcs across The Walking Dead's 11 seasons. Rick Grimes starts as a moral sheriff trying to preserve law and order. By season 5, he's biting out throats and executing people without trial. Carol Pelletier starts as an abused wife who can barely speak up at the quarry. By season 4, she's burning sick people alive to contain disease spread. Daryl Dixon starts as a volatile loner. By season 7, he's Negan's prisoner, broken and remade. Over and over, the series shows us characters transforming from who they wanted to be into who survival forced them to become. Shane went through that transformation in season 2. Episode 3, Save the Last One, the Otis incident. That's Shane's thesis statement. One person dies so another can live. The math is brutal but undeniable. And then watch how that same logic ripples forward through the series. Season 4, Episode 2, Infected. Carol kills Karen and David, burning them alive to stop the flu from spreading through the prison. Rick exiles her for it. The group is horrified. But Carol's calculation is identical to Shane's. Sacrifice 2 to potentially save dozens. She wasn't trying to be cruel. She was trying to survive. Season 5, Episode 1, No Sanctuary. Rick and the group are trapped at Terminus, about to be butchered for meat. Rick uses a piece of wood to cut through his restraints, then leads the group in executing every Terminus resident they encounter. No trials, no mercy, no second chances. That's Shane's worldview, perfected and deployed by the man who killed him for it. Season 6, Episode 9, No Way Out. Rick, covered in walker guts, leads the Alexandrians in a brutal counterattack to retake their community from a walker horde. He's given up on talking, on negotiating, on finding peaceful solutions. He's simply killing everything that threatens his people. Shane would have recognized that Rick instantly. Season 9, Episode 15, The Calm Before. Alpha places pike heads of captured allies along a border to mark her territory. It's theatrical brutality designed to send a message: stay in line or die. The governor did the same at Woodbury. Negan did the same with his lineup and Lucille. They're all variations of Shane's philosophy: use violence to establish dominance, eliminate threats before they can hurt you, sacrifice the few to protect the many. The if-then logic is almost mathematical. If Shane had survived Season 2, if he'd lived to see the prison fall and Terminus and the Saviors, would he have become Rick? Or would his obsessive love for Lori and Carl have twisted him into something like the governor, building a fortress and ruling through fear? The fan theories split on this question. Some believe Shane would have learned that he would have seen Rick's ability to build communities and adapted. They point to moments like Shane teaching Carl to catch frogs as evidence of his capacity for gentleness and patience. Others argue Shane was fundamentally broken by the hospital, that his worldview was too rigid to accommodate hope or trust. They point to his stalking of Lori, his willingness to murder his best friend, as evidence that he'd crossed too many lines to ever come back. Both interpretations make sense given what we see on screen. And that's what makes Shane so fascinating. As a character, he's Schrodinger's villain. Simultaneously, the prophet who saw the truth first, and the cautionary tale about what happens when you accept brutality too completely. The emotional weight of this theory is staggering, because it means Rick was always going to become Shane. The only question was how long it would take. Every loss, Laurie, Herschel, Beth, Glenn, pushed Rick further toward Shane's worldview. Every community that fell to prison, Alexandria pre-saviors, the century reinforced that sentiment and hope are liabilities. By the time Rick leaves the series in Season 9, he's closer to Shane's philosophy than to the sheriff's deputy who rode into Atlanta on horseback looking for survivors. Being right about the apocalypse didn't make Shane a hero. It just made him early. And being early in the apocalypse is its own kind of tragedy. But Shane wasn't just wrong about timing. He was catastrophically wrong about Laurie. And that blindness, that obsession, that's what separates Shane's pragmatism from Rick's eventual leadership. The Laurie factor is complicated, painful, and central to understanding why Shane couldn't survive even if his survival philosophy was sound. Back at the quarry, before Rick's return, Shane and Laurie began a relationship. The world had ended. They both believed Rick was dead. They sought comfort in each other, and it grew into something more. Shane fell in love, or convinced himself he had, and when Rick returned, Shane couldn't let go. Season 2 is full of scenes where Shane watches Laurie and Rick together, his face twisted with jealousy and possessive rage. He tells himself it's about protecting Laurie from Rick's dangerous optimism, about keeping Carl safe from his father's naivety. But it's really about ownership. Shane sees Laurie and Carl as his family, earned through those weeks of keeping them alive, and Rick's return feels like theft. The psychological dynamic here is crucial. Shane's clarity about the apocalypse, his ability to see threats accurately and make hard choices, all of it gets corrupted by his obsession. He can't separate what's best for the group from what gives me Laurie. Every argument with Rick becomes about proving Shane is the stronger protector, the better leader, the man who should be raising Carl. The survival instinct fuses with romantic obsession, and the combination is toxic. Laurie, for her part, is trapped between guilt and fear. She did love Shane during those weeks when Rick was gone. She sought comfort and built something real with him. But Rick's return forced her to confront the reality. She loves Rick, not Shane. And Shane's inability to accept that, his insistence that Laurie belongs with him because he earned her through survival leadership, it turns him from protector into stalker. The scene in Season 2, Episode 10, 18 Miles Out, where Laurie tells Shane to stay away from her family, "You need to leave us alone. That's what's best for everyone." Shane's face shows a man unable to process rejection. In his mind, everything he's done, every hard choice, every brutal calculation, it's all been for Laurie and Carl. And Laurie's rejection feels like betrayal of the mission, denial of the obvious truth that she's safer with Shane than with Rick. This is Shane's fatal flaw. He can see the apocalypse objectively, but he can't see his own motivations clearly. He tells himself he's protecting Laurie from Rick's dangerous idealism. But really, he's trying to claim her because he can't accept that love doesn't follow survival logic. You can't earn someone by keeping them alive. Relationships don't operate on the same brutal mathematics as resource allocation. And here's the tragedy. Shane's obsession with Laurie makes him miss what's actually happening. Rick isn't naive, he's adapting. Laurie doesn't need Shane's protection, she needs stability for Carl. The group isn't fooled by Rick's optimism. They're choosing hope as a conscious strategy because despair is its own kind of death. Some fans sympathize with Shane, seeing him as a man driven mad by impossible circumstances and unrequited love. Others see him as a dangerous obsessive who used survival as an excuse for possessiveness. The show gives evidence for both readings. Shane genuinely does make choices that keep people alive, but he also genuinely can't separate his protective instincts from his romantic obsessions. The question becomes, can you trust someone who's right about the world but blind about himself? Can you follow a leader who sees threats clearly but can't see his own motivations? Shane would have been a brilliant tactician in someone else's group, a valuable advisor for a leader who could filter his insights through better judgment. But as a leader himself, his obsessions were always going to corrupt his clarity. By the time Shane lures Rick into that field in Better Angels, planning to murder his best friend to take his place, he's lost the thread entirely. He's convinced himself that killing Rick is a survival necessity, that it's about protecting the group from weak leadership. But really, it's just about having Lori. And that delusion, that inability to see his own heart clearly, that's what makes Shane's final choice inevitable. You can't be a prophet if you lie to yourself about why you're preaching. Shane dies in Season 2, but his ideology doesn't. It gets inherited, refined, and deployed by every major antagonist who follows. The pattern is so consistent it feels deliberate. The Walking Dead keeps circling back to Shane's core philosophy, testing it through different characters in different circumstances. The Governor is Shane without love. Philip Blake builds Woodbury on the same principle Shane articulated. Strength determines survival. Sentiment is weakness. The leader makes hard choices others can't stomach. But where Shane's brutality was rooted in desperate love for specific people, the Governor's brutality is systematic. He's not protecting family, he's building empire. He keeps walkerheads in aquariums, maintains his daughter as a chained corpse, executes dissenters publicly. Shane's logic, stripped of humanity and scaled up to community governance. When the Governor attacks the prison in Season 4, Episode 8, Too Far Gone, his speech to Rick could have been written by Shane. We can all live together. There's enough room for all of us. But the subtext is pure dominance. Submit to my leadership or die. It's Shane's argument about strong leadership, protecting the group, but without Shane's genuine, if obsessive, desire to keep specific people safe. Negan is Shane's philosophy perfected and industrialized. The Savior's entire system in Season 6 to 8 operates on Shane's core belief. People are resources to be managed. Violence maintains order. The strong protect the weak by ruling them. People are a resource, Negan says in Season 8, Episode 5, The Big Scary You. That's Shane's mathematics given voice. But here's the crucial difference. Negan builds a sustainable system. The Saviors have rules, hierarchies, resource distribution networks. They're brutal, but they work. Shane never got that far. He was still fighting for personal stakes: Lori, Carl, his position in the group. Negan thinks bigger, creating an empire where Shane was only ever fighting for a family. The dialogue callback is striking. Negan's I'm Negan speech to the Alexandrians about bashing heads and following rules, that's Shane's barn speech refined. These things ain't sick. They're not people. Both men forcing brutal truths on communities trying to preserve illusions of normalcy. Both using violence to wake people up to reality. The difference is scale and detachment. Alpha takes Shane's ruthlessness even further. The Whisperers, in Seasons 9 to 10, represent survival stripped of all sentiment. No communities, no possessions, no names. Just animal existence, moving with the herds, taking what's needed. When Alpha tells Lydia, in Season 9, Episode 15, The Calm Before, you are nothing but a threat to me, about her own daughter. She's embodying Shane's coldest calculations without any of his emotional complications. Alpha would never die for love like Shane did. She'd sacrifice her daughter without hesitation if survival demanded it. In that sense, she's Shane's philosophy taken to its logical extreme survival, untainted by love. Leadership through absolute dominance. Humanity reduced to pure function. The pattern is undeniable. Every major Walking Dead villain is a variation on Shane's theme. They see the world clearly. They accept brutality as necessary. They make hard choices others refuse. And they all fail eventually, but not because their survival logic was wrong. They fail because they lost the balance between pragmatism and humanity that Rick, somehow, manages to maintain. What separates a survivor from a tyrant? Maybe just time, like I said earlier. But maybe it's something more specific. The ability to see the world as Shane saw it. Brutal, unforgiving, demanding terrible choices while still holding on to reasons to preserve humanity anyway. Shane never found that balance. The governor, Negan, and Alpha didn't even try. They took Shane's insights about survival and built them into systems of control, empires of fear, philosophies of dominance. And every time the group faces one of these antagonists, they're facing Shane's ghost. They're fighting the question Shane raised back in Season 2. Do you become a monster to survive, or do you die trying to stay human? Rick's answer, forged through seasons of loss. You become a monster when necessary, but you don't build a throne out of it. You make hard choices, then carry the weight. You kill when you have to, then find reasons not to the next time. Shane's heirs forgot that second part. They built kingdoms. Rick just built a life. Maybe that's the difference between a prophet and a king. Prophets warn about the storm. Kings claim they control it. Rick's inheritance from Shane becomes explicit in Season 5, Episode 10, Them. The group is exhausted, starving, dehydrated. They're walking through Georgia's back roads with dwindling hope, and Rick gathers them in an abandoned barn to tell a story that reframes everything we know about his transformation. He talks about his grandfather's service in World War II. His grandfather fought, saw terrible things, came home. And he told Rick that every day in the war, he woke up a new man, someone who had to pretend to be dead to survive. So I know what it's like to be left behind, Rick says. I know what it's like to feel, to survive, to not know if you want to. Then Rick delivers the line that could serve as Shane's epitaph. We are the walking dead. Not the walkers, them. The survivors who wake up every day having died a little more inside, who go through the motions of living while carrying corpses of who they used to be. Rick is describing exactly what happened to Shane. The transformation from protector to predator. From human to something that wears humanity like camouflage. And Daryl's response is perfect. We ain't them. There it is. The debate Shane started in Season 2, still unresolved 3 seasons later. Are they the walking dead, shambling through existence making brutal choices, because that's what survival demands? Or are they still human, still capable of choice, still responsible for preserving something worth surviving for? Rick became what Shane tried to teach him. The evolution is documented across dozens of episodes. Back in Season 1, Rick wanted to rescue Merle from the rooftop in Atlanta, even though Merle was racist, violent, and dangerous. By Season 5, Rick executes Pete in Alexandria Street without trial because Pete threatened his people. The moral distance between those two Ricks is the distance Shane tried to push him across in Season 2. But here's what makes Rick's journey different from Shane's. Rick learned when to stop. Shane, at the barn, forcing everyone to confront the walkers that was necessary truth-telling. Shane in the field, planning to murder Rick to claim Lori, that was obsession. Rick learned to deploy Shane's ruthlessness tactically while preserving strategic humanity. He became brutal when necessary, but didn't let brutality become his identity. The emotional cost is visible in Andrew Lincoln's performance across the seasons. Watch Rick's face in Season 1, open, hopeful, believing in rescue and recovery. Then watch his face in Season 7, after Negan kills Glenn and Abraham. Dead eyes, mechanical movements. He's performing leadership because the group needs it, but the optimism is gone. That's Shane's transformation, just stretched across 5 years instead of compressed into 10 episodes. Some fans argue Rick proved Shane wrong by building Alexandria and the Coalition, by creating sustainable communities where Shane only saw temporary camps. They point to Rick's speech in Season 8, Episode 16. Wrath, about building a future, about mercy for enemies, as evidence he transcended Shane's philosophy. Others argue Rick only survived long enough to build communities because he learned Shane's lessons about when to be ruthless. They note that Rick executed Pete, threatened Negan, isolated Alexandria from potential allies, all choices Shane would have endorsed. The communities came later. After Rick accepted the brutal logic, Shane died trying to teach him. Both readings have merit. And I think the answer is probably both Rick needed Shane's ruthlessness to survive long enough to build something, but he also needed to move beyond it to build something worth surviving for. The inheritance is complete by the time Rick leaves in Season 9. He saved Alexandria, defeated Negan, built a coalition of communities. But he's also killed dozens of people, made brutal calculations about who lives and who dies, forced communities to submit to his leadership vision. He's Shane, and more than Shane. He's the prophet student who took the lesson, but found a better application. Rick's idealism died slowly, where Shane's died at the hospital. But it died all the same. The question is whether Rick replacing it with something better than Shane's pragmatism, or just something that lasted longer. Did Shane fail? Or did he just plant a seed that took years to grow into something he wouldn't recognize? But Shane was wrong about one crucial thing. He assumed permanent collapse. His entire worldview was built on the premise that civilization was gone forever, that the old rules would never return, that survival meant accepting endless brutality. And for a while, he was right. The CDC exploded. The government never arrived. The military never regrouped. The farm fell, the prison fell. Woodbury and Terminus proved that other survivors could be more dangerous than walkers. Shane's assumption that this was permanent seemed validated by every community failure across Seasons 1 through 5. But then, Alexandria survived. The hilltop survived. The kingdom was built from nothing. The Commonwealth, eventually revealed in Season 11, showed that large-scale civilization could be rebuilt, complete with social structures, legal systems, and political hierarchies that echoed the old world. Shane never saw that coming. His philosophy assumed Phase 1, pure survival, constant threat, brutal necessities will last forever. He didn't account for Phase 2, where communities stabilize and humanity's social nature reasserts itself. People don't just want to survive, they want to live. They want music and theater and education and romance and all the messy, beautiful complexity that makes civilization worth rebuilding. The Commonwealth arc in Seasons 10 and 11 demonstrates this perfectly. Here's a community of 50,000 people with job assignments, currency, legal systems, and stratify social classes. It's corrupt, yes. It has inequality and injustice and leaders who abuse power. But it exists. It proves that Shane's assumption about permanent collapse was wrong. If Shane had lived to see the Commonwealth, how would he have reacted? Would he have adapted, understanding that survival strategies need to evolve as circumstances change? Or would he have doubled down, arguing that the Commonwealth's complexity made it vulnerable, that smaller, harder groups would always outsurvive civilized communities? I think about this a lot. Shane's pragmatism was calibrated perfectly for early apocalypse survival. His instincts for threat assessment, resource management, and hard choices, all of that, was exactly what the group needed in seasons 1 and 2. But those same instincts might have made him dangerous in season 11, when the challenge wasn't surviving walkers, but rebuilding democracy. Some fans speculate that Shane would have become a great Commonwealth soldier, someone who could protect the walls, while others worried about politics. Others think he would have rebelled against the inequality, seeing the stratified system as exploitative and vulnerable. Still others imagine Shane as a Lance Hornsby figure, using survival credibility to accumulate power while claiming it's for the greater good. All three possibilities feel plausible, given what we know about his character. Shane was adaptable within his framework. He adjusted tactics constantly. But could he have adjusted his entire worldview to accommodate hope? Could he have accepted that permanent brutality wasn't necessary once stability returned? The alternate interpretation changes everything. Shane's worldview was true for Phase 1, but incomplete. He was right about the storm. It was brutal, lethal, unforgiving. But he was wrong about the storm being permanent. He couldn't see past the immediate threat to imagine what might come after. Rick, Carl, Michonne, Daryl, Carol, they all learned Shane's lessons about survival. But they also learned when to stop deploying them, when to risk vulnerability for the sake of building something lasting. Shane might never have made that transition. His clarity about immediate threats might have blinded him to long-term possibilities. There's a balance here that feels important. Shane wasn't wrong to be ruthless in season 2. The barn needed opening. Otis's sacrifice did save Carl. The group did need someone willing to make impossible choices. Shane's error wasn't his assessment of the present. It was his inability to imagine a different future. By season 11, when communities are trading goods and holding elections and arguing about immigration policy, Shane's philosophy feels incomplete. Still useful for the soldiers on the walls, still necessary when threats emerge, but not sufficient for the people trying to build lives inside those walls. Maybe that's the real lesson. Shane was right about the storm. He just never believed there could be a sunrise. And that failure of imagination, that inability to hope beyond immediate survival, that's what made his philosophy incomplete even when it was accurate. He saw the darkness clearly. He just couldn't see past it. The cost of knowing. That's what Shane's story is really about. Not villainy or heroism, but the specific tragedy of seeing clearly too soon. Shane understood the apocalypse before anyone else. At the hospital, when the power failed and the soldiers were executing patients, Shane grasped immediately that the old world was gone. No rescue was coming. No authority would restore order. The rules had changed fundamentally, and anyone who didn't adapt would die. That clarity saved his life. It also destroyed him. Because here's the thing about being the first one to see the truth. No one believes you. They think you're paranoid, pessimistic, cruel. Rick arrives at the quarry, still talking about rescue operations and CDC cures, and Shane knows it's fantasy. But if he says so, he's the villain, crushing people's hope. Herschel keeps walkers in his barn, believing they can be saved, and Shane knows it's dangerous delusion. But when he opens those doors, he's the monster destroying an old man's faith. The emotional arc is devastating. Shane starts season 1 as the protector, the leader everyone depends on, the man keeping the quarry camp alive through competence and hard choices. He ends season 2, dead in a field, killed by his best friend, remembered as the villain who went too far. And the tragedy is that he was right about almost everything. He was just early, and being early made him look crazy. Think about the symbolic journey of the hospital door. Shane barricaded it with that gurney in the flashback, trying to protect Rick before fleeing the chaos. That door represents the threshold between the old world and the new one, between believing in rescue and accepting survival on its own terms. Shane crossed that threshold in episode 6 of season 1. Rick didn't cross it until season 5. 3 years of story time, dozens of episodes, hundreds of deaths and losses and brutal lessons. That's how long it took for everyone else to reach the understanding Shane had from the beginning. And by the time they got there, Shane was dead, buried at Herschel's farm, unmourned, except as a cautionary tale about what happens when you lose your humanity. But did Shane lose his humanity, or was he carrying weight no one acknowledged? Every hard choice he made in season 2, someone else makes in later seasons. Carol burns the sick at the prison. Rick bites out Joe's throat. Daryl executes former friends without hesitation. Michonne decapitates Governor's people in cold blood. They all become versions of Shane because survival in The Walking Dead demands it. Shane's fatal error wasn't his philosophy. It was his timing and his obsession. If he'd survived past his fixation on Lori, if he'd lived long enough to see Rick transform into someone who understood his worldview, maybe they could have worked together. Maybe Shane's tactical clarity, combined with Rick's moral weight, could have built something powerful. Instead, Shane died alone in that field, shot by the friend he'd kept alive at the hospital, never knowing that Rick would eventually say, "We are the walking dead," in a barn, and mean exactly what Shane had been trying to tell him all along. The head-shaving scene in Save the Last One, the image we started with, takes on new meaning after following Shane's entire arc. It's not madness. It's not breakdown. It's mourning. Shane is grieving for the version of himself who would have died with Otis rather than shoot him. He's letting go of the man who believed loyalty and friendship mattered more than survival. He's transforming into someone the apocalypse can kill strong, hard, ruthless when necessary. And the tragedy is that transformation was necessary. Just not yet. Not in season 2, when communities could still be built on something other than fear. Shane was the right man for phase 1, but it couldn't evolve into the man phase 2 would need. Maybe the apocalypse doesn't create monsters. Maybe it just reveals who was already ready to become one. Or maybe it forces everyone to become monsters temporarily, and the real test is whether you can find your way back when the immediate crisis passes. Shane never got that chance. He saw the end coming. No one believed him, and by the time everyone else caught up, he was already gone.